Welcome, everyone, to the Brass Spring 2024 Symposium. I'm Brian Garrison Newton, Chair of the Symposia Committee. Thank you to our subcommittee members, Christy Cunningham, Doris Jui, Christine Pollock, and Angel Truesdale. All sessions will be recorded and sent out to those who have registered. Please mute your audio and video as we get started. Thank you for spending time with Brass and our presenters today. Now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Christine Pollock, to get us started.
Hi, welcome everybody. So I am going to keep this brief and just give you a brief introduction to our first presenter, who is Michael Deike from the University of Notre Dame, and he will be presenting to us today about AI trends in finance databases, a collection focus. So please take it away, Michael.
Thank you, Christine. Is everybody able to hear me all right, first off?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. As I go along, I also have like 3 monitors, and one of them has the chat open. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to pop it into the chat. I'll kind of be looking at it. I'm going to do a bit of a talk here, probably for about 25 minutes to half an hour. I've asked Christine to cut me off at half an hour because I want one component of this session to be, I'm talking today about AI trends in finance databases, looking at a collection focus. So what I've kind of noticed as I'm going around, of course, I'm a business librarian. I do reference and research consultations and do support for a finance department that's pretty active around here. And I get a lot of exposure to databases such as Bloomberg, Capital IQ, LSEG, FactSet, so on and so forth. And I'm starting to notice between some of them, especially Capital IQ and Bloomberg, that there's a lot of increased language by these database vendors surrounding artificial intelligence and AI. And some of it is somewhat questionable in a sense, but we'll get into that. And what I want to do is, of course, at the end, I mentioned talking about half an hour. I want the end time to be some time for anybody else in the audience to speak up on their experience if they've encountered with other database vendors, kind of this increase in AI language, or even if, let's say, you've had something that's come up for a renewal that you had to approve a subscription, and they tried to sell you something based on AI. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. And we're going to start off on here. So AI trends in finance databases, a collection focus. I want to start off with some language surrounding AI, right? Because I mentioned this increase in language and rhetoric surrounding AI when it comes to the collection landscape. And I've made a nifty thing here about tech cycles, okay? So some of you may be familiar in the room, some of you may not be. Something called Gartner hype cycles. That's something that kind of looks at the hype and interest of an innovative tech trend, usually centered for investment, venture capital, private equity, that sort of thing. And it kind of has this trajectory where a new technology is introduced and then it increases in its hype, so to speak, and apexes at a point where the expectations for the technology kind of level off, and then people get kind of sobered about the technology, right? So the hype is increasing. People are having all these ideas about how great the technology is going to be. It plateaus. Then all of a sudden, we'll get a little bit more realistic about the limitations of the technology, and interest maybe goes down a bit, right? So I wanted to include a Gartner hype cycle on this, but the subscription I have to it requires a bunch of copyright things to get permission to use it. So I kind of created my own copyright friendly. I'm calling it the AI interest incline. So this is not a hype cycle. This is the copyright friendly version, right? And what you have here is the interest over time, right? And that little dot is kind of where we're allegedly at when it comes to AI. So these usually have anywhere from a 0 to 2 to 2 to 5 to 5 to 10 year life cycle. And this is looking at it in the more 3 to 5 approach, where we're kind of at the 3/4 point of the apex of this interest in AI, and people are kind of predicting that it's going to peak and then level out a bit, right? So I want to talk a little bit about AI, the technology, right? Because I mentioned the difference in language. So when it comes to AI, the technology, AI is a specific type of technology. It does a particular thing. It's usually built out of large language models. And these large language models, they take a lot of text or image or some sort of content that makes the model learn iteratively over time, right? So the more stuff that gets put in it, the more that it learns. There's ways to constrain this, right? ChatGPT is a bit of an unconstrained model because it has so much varied topicality of information is ingested into it. But there's a lot of smaller ones that are getting made that are based on more specific corpuses of information. Let's say, for example, I took my email and I ingested all of that into a large language model. I could hypothetically create an AI that's specialized around how I respond via my emails, right? You can make a very subject-specific kind of AI product, okay? Now, the other thing about these large language models and AI is that they're probabilistic in nature. This is a very important distinction when it comes to AI, okay? When it's generating content, it's doing it based on a model of statistical probability, which is the primary reason that you might get strange results sometimes. If you've been looking at ChatGPT for a long time, you've seen the phenomena of AI hallucinations. You ask it for a citation, and the citation comes back as something that's total gibberish. That's because it's generating content by giving you a word, then saying probability-wise, what's the most likely next thing that should occur? And it doesn't always come out correctly, right? So the idea behind AI is to get it sort of 99% correctly, even though there's room for error to occur kind of no matter what you do. Now, a big thing to distinguish AI, the technology, is that it's meant to simulate human behavior in some capacity. So once again, with ChatGPT, it's a conversation simulator. It's generating the production of text, right? If you have an art AI, a stable diffusion, something along those lines, it's trying to emulate the artistic process, okay? So outside of the technology, we go forward into AI, the buzzword, right? So this is where I'm seeing AI come up a lot when it comes to vendors, their documentation, their communication, things that you see in their platform, where they will mention the use of AI, but what they are actually describing might not exactly match this concept of AI as it exists in like the ChatGPT generative AI space, right? So there's natural language processing. You'll see this a lot in vendor documentation surrounding AI, where they cite natural language processing as their avenue for AI, which natural language processing is a component of AI, but it's not necessarily AI in itself. So sometimes the way they use it, they describe it as AI, is kind of elevating what they're actually offering. Another one, and this is my favorite one that I've seen, is that when it comes to finding ways to more accurately like determine relevance of documents, one vendor that we'll go over I've seen use the language of computer vision, which seems to be referring to OCR in a sense of essentially running a document through OCR to determine what text is on it and what things are relevant. And they're calling this computer vision, which is a humorous term to me. And then there's search algorithms, of course. Search algorithms are often turned to determine search results based on inputs. And a lot of vendors I'm seeing are using this kind of tuning of a search algorithm and once again elevating this into the context of AI in a way that's not always exactly on point, right? So, main reason I do this distinction between the technology and the buzzwords, right, is sales tactics, right? A lot of us are probably managing collections, and yes, I see the comment of what people are calling AI washing. Exactly. So the concept of sales tactics, right? A lot of us are managing collections, especially when it comes to finance databases. These things are very expensive, and vendors are increasingly using this AI language in their interactions, in their documentation, in their promotional videos as a selling point. And as I mentioned previously, it's not always actually innovative in the sense that they're describing it, and it's not always quite an accurate description of perhaps the enhancement that they're trying to sell on their product, right? And of course, the presence of AI in these finance databases, it's going to impact future costs, kind of regardless of the authenticity of what's being provided. And I have a few examples that I'm going to go over here of finance databases that are currently kind of adopting this AI adoption and language in their documentation and in their platforms. So what I have for you guys today is some kind of cases from Bloomberg and from Capital IQ based on my own research assistance work with my community over here at the Mendoza College of Business, and where I've seen these AI things come up, right? So I'm going to start with Capital IQ. Over here, have a recent press release on AI-enabled document analytics in Capital IQ Pro. And I know that this slide is not clickable, so I've got a link that I'm posted in the chat there to the promotional material that they put here. So Capital IQ is supporting this Capital IQ Pro platform, which is, at least in my case, something that they've told me is not yet ready for academic audiences, but in the 3 to 5 year kind of time scale is what they want to roll out for academic audiences to overwrite Capital IQ legacy, which I don't know how on that timeline they are going to keep based on the way things are going, but that's kind of up in the air. And they released this press statement stating that they are enhancing their document analytics with this AI-driven technology, right? And this is the one, I believe, where it had the statement of computer vision within the documentation, right? So when you read this press release, it's kind of vague as to what this actually is, right? Our artificial intelligence enabled workflow tool is how they describe this. Well, what is that? Am I getting a little Capital IQ AI assistant that's going to help me when I'm going through the documentation that they have? Is this going to be like a chat GPT for Capital IQ? That kind of thing. Doesn't really look like it based on what I've been able to turn up on this. So if I go through their documentation in the knowledge base for Capital IQ, they talk about this AI concept on here, and it comes up in the context of topic tagging. So essentially assigning topical metadata to documents to enhance the relevance retrieval of its search algorithm, right? And it just kind of says, you can see I've highlighted there, using an AI-based model, and there's not a whole lot of detail as to what that means. And it seems kind of indicative that there's not really much of an innovation that's actually occurring with this change, is that they're simply possibly enhancing the metadata quality for what they put into their document viewer. And yes, AI-assisted index or taxonomy building, right? So something that's not really generative in the sense that we would imagine with the popular AI technology at the moment, and something that's a little bit vague on what it is that they're actually going to be putting into their system, right? So I was able to crack into Capital IQ Pro in their document viewer where they claim this AI technology is in here. And you can see here, you get a little search box, and this is where you would go. You can type in whatever kind of topic area you want, put JP Morgan, see what research documentation they have surrounding JP Morgan. Maybe it's filings, maybe some market research reports, maybe some equity reports, all that sort of good stuff would show up, right? So when you run a search in here now, it has this little icon for information for entities, where this is what seems to be their labeling of the taxonomy they're using for this AI assistance bit. And it says the document viewer recognizes company references using state-of-the-art machine learning. In limited instances, its predictions are incorrect. Please report such instances using feedback. So in this instance, where you're actually using the document viewer for the enhancement that they're claiming with this AI thing, now they've changed language to machine learning, which is a bit older of a methodology that's still related to AI, but it's maybe not quite reaching that level of innovation that you would see in the real AI field. So through this kind of process, you can't entirely verify whether or not there's actually the presence of authentic AI within this enhancement that they're kind of advertising, right? And one thing that happens when you search by this entities bit is that it is moving to a much more natural language processing search methodology. So with all these AI technologies, there's definitely a move away from the traditional kind of Boolean search methodology that you would use in a text-centered database, where they're trying to apply their own kind of branded natural language processing, Googleification of everything, so to speak. And some problematic issues with that is, of course, even the entities field that it has here admits sometimes mistakes occur and it doesn't quite work right. And you're a little bit more limited on what actual control and constraints that you can actually put on the search as a searcher, because you're kind of stuck in this machine learning tagging methodology here, where it always tries to tie what you're searching to one of these entities. So it becomes more difficult to see what's actually going on under the hood when you're performing a search in a platform that uses this type of AI implementation, so to speak, right? So that's what I've been able to find on Capital IQ as far as their integrations of AI. They don't have a whole lot going on yet, but it's probably something they'll develop and iterate on more in the future. And the next one that I have is out of Bloomberg, which Bloomberg's pretty interesting. I would say that of what I've looked at, I would consider them kind of a gold standard of transparency, which the gold standard in this, the bar's not exactly that high, so I don't know if that's the right word to use. But I found their documentation to be a lot more helpful and insightful than when I looked at Capital IQ's. So with Bloomberg, you operate off of functions. And of course, Bloomberg, a lot of their AI implementation right now is centered more specifically on either search taxonomies, similar to what we saw with Capital IQ, or the actual data collection that they do for the quantitative data fields that they have, right? So what I have on here is I've pulled a Walmart equity class in Bloomberg, and you can see all the functions that are available there. Well, starting since at least, I don't know, maybe 4 months ago or so, I started noticing this. You've got these little AI tags next to the functions in which Bloomberg has deemed some form of AI is present in the information that's available there. So you see it in the company news function. This is where you probably get into that OCR, indexing, taxonomy, search assistance, that kind of thing. And then the financial analysis, that's where you get in AI essentially being applied to crawlers for regulatory filings to assist and automate the process of data entry. And it's kind of nice as far as the presence of AI is concerned that you have this sort of transparency, because as a researcher, now you know that AI is involved here in a much more explicit manner, right? You still have this separation between kind of the human-generated content and the AI-generated content, which could matter depending on what you're researching, right? So if we click on one of those AI tags, takes us over here, where in this instance, I clicked on it in the company analysis section, and it gives me a full documentation of how Bloomberg is implementing AI technologies, what they are, how they define it. You see that computer vision thing that I said I thought was funny again, but they're at least transparent and honest about what you're doing when you drill down into the documentation, right? And you can see they've even put together kind of a help function where if you were to go to AIBB Go, that's a whole help interface with all the AI-related content documentation. It's all savable, shareable, and all that sort of good stuff. So this one I would hold in a bit of a higher standard as far as in Capital IQ. It's a lot harder to drill down to the information to find how they're using AI. And in Bloomberg, it's a lot more expansive, a lot more honest, and overall, a pretty good thing, right? Though it's still not at the level of innovation, as I mentioned before, where we're really seeing a massive modification of the presence of AI impacting the product itself, right? So going through here, I have what I see as kind of a likely progression and some areas of concern that I've identified in here. I think that the general trajectory that a lot of finance data vendors especially will take is that they will move toward the creation of proprietary generative AI. So of course, all these finance databases kind of have their universe of data that's within their ownership, right? Ownership's a very key part of this AI question. And I figure that they're going to eventually make some sort of enhancement or separate purchasable service, perhaps, where you'll see something that's essentially like how I've labeled it here, a Cap GPT or a Bloom GPT, right? A virtual AI assistant that's attached to this specific data universe that you can use to refine down and assist in research questions, get help when you need it, all that sort of stuff. And it will be based on the proprietary information that Bloomberg and Capital IQ own. So it'll be a lot more specialized than what you would see with like a Chat GPT or a Perplexity AI. So there will be strengths and weaknesses kind of associated with that approach. Now, along with this, what I think is a likely trajectory, there's going to be a much greater increased complexity when it comes to data ownership, right? Bloomberg and Capital IQ, they license out a lot of third-party information. There's stuff from banks that they are hosting that they don't necessarily own the full rights to, but they may own display rights or read-only rights. There's going to be a lot of instances of maybe access is cut off to things depending on what parts of this product you own or don't own. I also think that these vendors are going to become even more protectionist about their data universe itself, right? They're probably going to want to put a lot more restrictions on what can leave their platform, and they're going to make a lot more demands that services be kind of put in place that keeps the work researchers do within a platform, okay? Some samples of this direction outside of Bloomberg or Capital IQ, where I see this happening in reality, is in like Nexus Uni, where they have their Nexus Data Lab that puts a programming environment within the Nexus landscape, where you might be able to export descriptive statistics or information that you're working on, but you don't ever actually get access to the raw data. That stays in-house because it's become such a valuable commodity to whatever database platform that is working with it. ProQuest Studio is another example of this. It's a in-environment coding platform where you can run code, do data analytics, but you can't take the data itself out of the environment, which that could be problematic in a lot of ways, especially with, for example, you have that Nelson memo that came out a long while ago of expecting open access for data sets and data sources for any federal funded research. I don't know how possible it will be to do that in such an environment. And Stephanie ProQuest Studio is what that was called, like so. So, and of course, transparency is going to be a problem as well, because the language of AI is very vague and gray. There's not a lot of concrete definitions of where the line begins or ends of what makes a technology AI, and whether or not AI, in whatever instance it's being reported to you, is actually an improvement or a good thing. So one thing I would highly recommend for anybody who interacts with any of these database vendors is to very much pressure them to be extremely transparent in their documentation before you give them a sale on any of these kind of transactions. And then, of course, we're in an environment where there's a potential for a lot of regulatory pressure because, politically speaking, there's basically a war going on between anti-AI and pro-AI lobbyists who all have a different conception of how AI should be regulated, and it's very difficult to get an agreement on that. So it's a industry that's under a lot of political pressure in that area. Now, another
There's
thing,
5 minutes left.
thank you. So another thing that is of potential problematic is this liability for data quality. When you outsource your data entry to AI, there's a level of liability that no longer exists as to when a person did it. If a person did it, it's on the payroll of the company that did the data entry, a mistake is made, there's an identifiable chain of custody for how that data was created, how it went wrong, and what kind of remediations can be in place for how it went wrong. With AI, that kind of breaks the chain of accountability because AI is not a person. If it makes a mistake, there's probably right now with the regulatory environment, a lot less legal protections in place and a much more complicated legal landscape in the event that it gets something wrong, right? So imagine a situation, somebody gets AI generated Bloomberg data, all the Bloomberg data turns out to be wrong and their research turns out to be bunked and they end up with a retracted paper. That would be a very complicated legal situation probably, right? And then the other thing that I see an issue with is, of course, especially when you see this AI integration into searches and search algorithm, is this loss of search control. We're moving away from the old search methodology of Boolean operators where it was easy to tell what your search is doing and what it's pulling. And it's easy to tell when the search is going wrong or when something with the Boolean operators isn't functioning properly, which I think we've all seen recently as I monitor the business libraries listserv. Where Google, a lot of their Boolean operations are suddenly just blinking in and out of existence, it seems. With the loss of search control, it's going to be a lot harder to actually pull relevant information out of these things because you don't have as much control over it and you're relying on the accuracy of automation, which may or may not work properly at times, right? So one thing I would advise is, once again, in contacts with vendors, advocate if they're going to move to this approach to make both ways available so that there's still a fallback option in the event the automation doesn't work great. Which I've already gone a little bit into this based off of my last slide, but what can librarians do in this environment? For anybody in here who's interacting with vendors, managing collections, please do your best to be aware of the language surrounding AI so that when you're in contact with a vendor, stuff isn't just going over the head and you're not having to just take the word for what a salesman is kind of telling you when it comes to these technological innovations. I'd also recommend having a healthy sense of skepticism when it comes to claims regarding AI by vendors. Prepare for a lot of difficult pricing in the vendor landscape. I think that in a lot of ways, with the data vendors being a lot more protectionist for their stuff, they're going to increase costs. It's going to be very hard to persuade them to go down, right? And then I'd also recommend supporting and preserving open data initiatives, with the big being the preserving component. In addition to supporting, we want to keep open data initiatives accessible so that in this kind of protectionist environment, there are other alternative options still, and that these vendors don't get into a total monopoly of data access, right? And so the preservation being the most important part, because once again, with open data, the way that like ChatGPT and these other AI companies are gathering their data, a lot of open data initiatives are honestly under a lot of threat right now because there's questions surrounding can an open AI just crawl through all of these open data things? Is that really sustainable? Is this going to cause more problems down the line? So we kind of really need to drive home preserving these data initiatives and keeping them accessible so that they don't go away. And so I think I've made my half-hour mark here because I really do want to open up the floor and hear from anybody else in the audience. Have any of you guys had any other encounters with vendors where maybe they've tried to sell you something that was AI generated, or they had some sort of AI-oriented service that they wanted to attach to you, or anything along those lines? Because I've only focused here on the finance databases, right? I've been looking a lot at like Capital IQ or Bloomberg or LSEG or FactSet, but I'm very interested if anybody's seen this along like the market research, maybe a Mintel or a Euromonitor, if Ibis World has had any documentation out for AI. Leap with Mintel. Rachel, it's so lovely to see you. Do you want to talk on that for a second?
That came up through an option with our Mintel database. They asked if we would like to upgrade to Leap. We said no because it ended up being many thousands of dollars, but it's their AI generated and it is in-house for them. But it was something interesting they were trying to promote to us.
So was it AI generated content or was it like a generative AI service for them?
It's AI generative for their context, for their material.
Interesting. Thousands of dollars, you say?
Thousands of, that's what they told us, but they have invested heavily in their own AI system. So it does sound like they are doing the background work for this. But they are marketing it to us now. But I don't know if it's actually online yet or not.
Yeah, and that's very interesting because that kind of tracks with the changes they've made to their platform recently, because I'm pretty sure everybody in the room is as up in arms as I am about how hard it is to get their data out of the platform now and how they don't want to give PDFs or access to the actual data books. There's probably a reason for that with the AI going through.
Correct.
Thanks, Rachel. Others, any other noticers? Unshare my screen here so I can see the participants list.
I think Nexus Uni you talked about, they're doing some portion of AI with their articles. They're going to start doing the text summarization tools.
Natalie, you mentioned not selling to public libraries, period. Is Mintel sending that as a policy?
Just the Leap, just the new Leap search. They said no, it won't be available to public libraries. So I assumed that had to do with the monetary thing that we're always arguing with them anyway about that. And we've also never had the ability to download. I know the academic libraries are a little different, but we've never had that ability in the public.
Yeah, I wonder if they're just in general more skeptical of their information getting out in the public library space with the users that you could probably expect for it.
Yes, that is part of it for sure.
Interesting. Yeah, Nexus was mentioned earlier as well, where they're doing kind of that AI taxonomy enhancing thing, I guess. Another thing with Nexus, which I'm sure a lot of people are probably aware, but some people not, is that they're having this new Nexus Data Lab product where they're experimenting with having a Jupyter Notebooks coding environment for Python/R, where you can run API requests and run programs against the data that's available in Nexus Uni. But it's all an in-house system. So all the code and everything that goes through, it passes through the Nexus servers, which researchers where I'm at, we have a bit of a problem with that wholesale because it's our researchers' intellectual property, their code, is passing through Nexus servers, which that's problematic because it's giving some of the sauce away, right? Yeah, and Amy, I was at that publishers forum. I remember Clarivate, Scopus, and JSTORs. But I had a dementia moment from Intel, so thank you. Others? Oh, we've got a link in the chat for Scopus's AI. Oh man, they even say that it's trusted content. That's some good branding. Okay, yeah, so this is going to be a Scopus Chat GPT kind of thing. Fun. I'm curious, has anybody, oh, what do we got here? Great question, Golnar. So for capital IQ, no, but there's a caveat to that, which I'll go into. And I'll answer that after the Bloomberg because there's a harder answer. Bloomberg flat no, they just did this and it started appearing, no changes. Could show up next year, don't know. Our stuff's not on renew. The contract period doesn't end for quite a while for us, so could show up next year. But for the capital IQ, I'm in a very weird capital IQ space. So I have access to legacy capital IQ, which does not have this same document viewer thing where the AI implementation is showing up. It's kind of the traditional capital IQ interface with like the screener, has a little bit more of the 90s kind of look to it, right? And Capital IQ Pro, separate product, is where they are dishing out all these kind of changes. Now, I've been told by my vendor representative, because at my institution, we kind of want to buy Capital IQ Pro, assuming it's reasonable. And they tell me that it's not ready yet for academic audiences and that it probably won't be for a number of years. Lord knows what the cost is going to be when they probably try to drop it on me. But a lot of these AI things aren't necessarily trickling over to the legacy platform, it looks like. It's pretty much maintaining its functionality as it stood for a long time. And the main reason that I was actually able to get inside Capital IQ and get the documentation information is a promise nobody tells anybody, but they made a mistake and gave me access to that on accident at a point. And it's not active anymore. But yes, Golnar, they would charge more for the Capital IQ Pro access when it does come. Yeah, that's another shh, don't tell anybody, Edward. A lot of whoopsie doodles on that side of the house. Any other noticings of weird AI things?
There is a comment in the chat. I wonder if licenses will change regarding liability of data integrity.
Oh yeah. Yeah, sorry, Stephanie, I missed that. I would say probably. However, I don't think right now that the lawyers at these places have the language necessary to do it right, and that they're probably in a regulatory quagmire of not knowing necessarily where these things are going to go, legally speaking. So that can mean one of two things, that they're going to hesitate on putting legal language surrounding these things with their license, or they're going to go gung-ho with it and it's going to be really weird and ununderstandable and uncharted territory. Linda, you say, I believe PitchBook uses AI to predict exits. I have access to PitchBook and I haven't looked into that, so that'll be a good one. I bet that change has a lot of potential liabilities when it comes to whether or not it is accurate about the exits. Kim, I'm reading your question here. Kim, as far as task is concerned, I'm not sure, but prompt, I believe, is referring to kind of the need for human intervention to prompt the AI to produce content. So prompt is going to be looking more at generative AI models with a more graphic user interface element to it. So it's going to require some form of user input in order to produce tasks, or shouldn't use the term task, produce content. But the task part, I'm a little not as apprised of. Also, this Statista accidentally showing that they're using AI, that's interesting. That's got to not be great. Yeah, Kim, with some things I'll admit to not being a hardcore programmer and knowing the under the hood specs of all the AI stuff. Hopefully somebody will be at one of the sessions who is more in that caliber. And man, I'm going through the links that you're sending about the pitch book thing. I'm like, man, there's going to be a lawsuit one day. This is great. I'm so glad I'm getting to talk with you guys about these. I'm having the best time with y'all. Eric, that's an interesting question. There, I would say that there's not a definitive answer on that. I actually wrote a paper recently in the Journal of Business and Finance Librarianship where I looked at the performance of AIs on answering business reference questions. And one thing is the inconsistency of responses by ChatGPT and just various other models is very difficult to predict because these generative AI models especially are on an iterative process. So they're in a state of kind of constant change. And that constant change occurs in like minor intervals, but then you also have the major interval changes of when a company that owns it, ChatGPT, OpenAI, they release the new version of ChatGPT, right? Now there's a big change on how consistent or inconsistent it is, how consistent or inconsistent it is based on what type of question you're asking. It's kind of all over the place. And that goes kind of way back to the probabilistic point that I try to drill home is probabilistic is always going to give some degree of flex to the ability of the AI to generate something that's just flat wrong or unclear or off the wall. And I feel like it's the hope of a lot of these companies to reduce that as much as possible, but any minor tweak and change can reduce or increase that kind of chaos factor that goes into these AIs. I'll have to look up my own article somebody's asking for. And Angel, you're great. Thank you. Yes, Kevin, correct. Yeah, one thing is I struggle with this a lot is I say I keep trying to convey that probabilistic element of things, but it's so difficult to visualize and describe that, I feel like.
All right, I'm just jumping in because we have about 1 minute left of the scheduled time.
So
we've got a little bit more time if anybody wants to put in any last comments.
Final question, folks. Final comments. Do you love me or hate me? I don't know.
No, thank you so much for the presentation. It gives a lot to think about, especially when dealing with vendors and the types of things to look for when talking to them. So thank you very much.
Don't be afraid to play hardball with these vendors, y'all.
Mhm.